His name is Yoshioka Shidru, and both he and everyone else knew the poor guy was, by any measure, ugly. Still, Shidru had always worn his rough looks with a strange kind of pride of face, as he liked to joke, that looked like it had caught fire and been put out with a wooden plank. In sales, he leaned into his appearance, showing he wasn't scared of anyone, always carrying himself with a blunt, confident air around his coworkers. His motto was simple: make the customers smile, and his efforts never failed him. Sure, he was never exactly popular with women, but that never stopped him from being content with his life. At least, that was true until one day. One ordinary morning on the subway, Shidru was accused of touching a woman, even though both his hands were full of shopping bags. To make things worse, as he was being forced out of the train car, he dropped a pile of erotic games he'd just bought, doing nothing to improve his image in front of everyone watching the scene unfold. Of course, nobody believed him, and the world showed itself to be even crueler to the less fortunate in the looks department. After being judged for his supposed crime, Shidru was hit with a 300,000 yen fine. He took the blame, feeling like all he was buying was time in the courtroom. Either way, his life was now in shambles. He was fired from the job he'd done so well, and things only got worse from there. Years later, the woman who'd accused him was eventually exposed. It turned out she made a habit of pretending to be a victim in these situations, maybe because she simply didn't like ugly guys with sewer breath. Because she was underage, all she got was a restraining order. Shidru was furious, but there was nothing he could do. One day, as he wandered through a park with his head hung low, he saw a kid in a wheelchair getting bullied by some punks. Watching the scene, what once had been a point of pride, his ugly face now felt like a curse, a torment. The trauma from that false accusation haunted him, and he could no longer have a normal day. Before he realized it, he'd shrunk into a clumsy, awkward guy with a face no one liked and barely any social skills. Time passed 6 years. Just like that, Shidru Yoshioka became an unemployed recluse. He'd blown through all his savings and spent his days mooching off his parents, a failure even less useful than cattle. At that point, his days were filled with reading online articles about conspiracy theories, kidnappings, human experiments, and missing people, always wondering if it wouldn't be better if he just disappeared, too. Amid all that garbage, he came across an article about another life, in another world, a kind of second chance at existence. With a bitter smile, he dismissed it as nonsense, then laid his depressed head on his pillow, letting the idea spin around his mind at 2 in the morning. Sick of doing nothing with his life, Shidru decided to follow some instructions he found online, just to see what would happen. He turned his computer to face north, opened the window, raised both arms, and waited. It's not like he actually expected to go to another world. Maybe, deep down, he just wanted his life to be flipped upside down, anything to shake off all that existential misery. Suddenly, a message appeared on the screen. If you want to experience a new life, keep going. To return, you'll have to pay half your expected lifespan. Thinking it was just some weird virus, Shidru clicked continue, hoping to close the window and restart his PC. But instead, a new window popped up, showing what looked like RPG character stats. Tempted by the idea of starting over as a 16-year-old, Shidru kept going until he reached the appearance stat, which was set to 5 points. For some reason, maybe because he didn't believe any of this, Shidru cranked it all the way down to -255. This earned him a massive bonus, 13,000 points to spend on other attributes like strength, vitality, and defense. There was also a field to describe his character's special traits. Most people would have filled it with good stuff, but Shidru went the other way. He gave himself just 1 point in money acquisition, trading it in for even more bonus points. On top of that, he set it so he'd lose 10 GP anytime a girl touched him. And if he tried anything indecent, he'd die instantly and painfully. With that, Shidru Yoshioka now had 100,005,100 bonus points to allocate. But just as he was about to start distributing them, his computer signaled that time was up and he vanished without a trace. Next thing he knew, he woke up in an unfamiliar world, his appearance just as unpleasant as ever. Thinking it was all just a dream, he glanced in the mirror only to be genuinely shocked by the kind of power someone with -255 appearance could wield. Suddenly, 2 women and a man appeared, all dressed in nothing but their underwear, as if they'd been waiting for him to show up. One of the girls was shivering, so the big guy handed over an extra piece of clothing, but when she refused, he realized that even in this strange new world, ugly guys still didn't stand a chance with women. Eventually, the guy in the group introduced himself as Seiji, age 16. Shidru pegged him as the handsome, well-spoken type. The blonde girl simply said she was 16 too, but didn't give her name. Finally, the other girl introduced herself as Seika. Then, to everyone's surprise, Shidru revealed that he was also 16. To be honest, Seiji thought the big guy looked a lot older, so worn out by life, but admitted he had a certain presence. He added that they must all have ended up in this world after following some instructions they'd found online. The girls agreed, and they all realized that, somehow, they'd started a second life together in this bizarre new world. Ridiculously enough, while still in their underwear, Shidru, uninterested in the conversation, wandered off. He had no plans to make friends. He opened a drawer in a dresser and found a single coin. Remembering his money acquisition rate was just 1 in 10,000 and the game rounded down, so even a little luck meant nothing. Seiji asks the big guy if he's found anything, but he shakes his head. Nothing. Anyway, Shidru finally introduces himself properly and gets a friendly response, though his new buddy clearly isn't sure how to react to all this. Later on, the group of 4 gets their hands on some gear kits they have to split among themselves. When Shidru grabs a shirt, he grumbles that there's no way this thing will fit him, but to his surprise, it slides on perfectly. The girls light up when they put on their new outfits too. But Seiji can't help noticing something strange. There are 4 of each item and piece of gear, but together they've only got 7 coins. As if it was obvious, Seika points out that you can't divide 7 by 4. And the blonde wonders if someone might have pocketed a coin. Knowing full well it was him, Shidru says he doesn't need the money and tells the others to split it among themselves. Seika says that's fair, since all 7 coins were found by people other than Mr. Shidru. The big guy knows it's true he might have found a coin, but he let plenty slip by while the girl teases that he was probably more interested in checking out the girls than searching for cash. Anyway, in exchange for giving up the money, Shidru says he'd like the axe, but Seika shoots him down, telling him to keep his hands off other people's stuff. Seiji comments that if Shidru tries to go solo, he'll just end up failing again. The big guy doesn't quite get it, so Seiji admits he's really talking about himself because of his own communication problems and selfishness. He'd caused trouble for others, but now, with this shot at a second life, he wants to overcome all that and try again. For that reason, he can't just ignore Shidru, who also seems to have trouble connecting with people. Maybe they can tackle this together. So, the 4 of them settle it with rock, paper, scissors to divvy up the gear. And after losing every round, Shidru is left with a staff. Seiji offers him a handshake, but Shidru instantly refuses. He's decided he doesn't want to get hurt in his second life, so he's going it alone. After all, he picked being the ugliest guy in the world in exchange for totally broken stats, so the possibilities are endless. As for the rest of the gang, Seiji suggests heading to the city of Iria, which is the closest one on the map. He's still eager to invite the big guy along for the adventure, and, faced with no real choice, Shidru tags along. With everything settled, they open the house's front door, only to be met by a small creature. Seika practically jumps out of her skin, but Seiji steps up, delivers a brutal axe blow, and turns the goblin into a respawn. Playing the leader, Pretty Boy handles the mess and checks if his companion is alright, or so it seems. The chaos is far from over, as a whole swarm of goblins comes marching toward the reborn quartet. Acting fast, Seiji tells Seika to string her bow so she can fight from a distance, while Shidru is supposed to help the archer. At the same time, the blonde should cover the left, while Seiji takes the right. With the plan in motion, Shidru wonders what Seiji meant about having communication issues. Up front, the 2 fighters are taking down the monsters in their path, while Seika fumbles trying to string her bow, distracted and passive. Shidru just stands there doing nothing until a monster clobbers him from behind. Furious now, he fights back, determined to show off his strength. But his counterattack is actually weaker than the hit he took. That's when the big guy realizes that, in this world, size isn't everything. He retreats under the assault from the little monster, only to take a blow to the knee that knocks him off balance. At that moment, it finally hits him. He forgot to assign his attribute points. Even so, he manages to block an attack and smack the goblin, which instantly shoots him up to level 31 thanks to his unique stats. Seiji and the blonde also level up, assigning their new points to strength and vitality. Watching all this, Shidru notices he can't see their status screens to copy what they're doing, so he just dumps 1 trillion points into every stat. The system totally glitches out, then comes back to reveal that he's now reached absolute god status. From that point on, whenever a goblin hit the big guy, he barely felt a tickle. In response, he flicks the little creature away with a single finger and takes a moment to savor his newfound power. Meanwhile, Seika is still struggling to string the damn bow. Up front, Seiji counts 16 goblins defeated, while the blonde tallies 13, leaving Seika feeling useless and even more embarrassed, facing the kind of situation he'd always tried to avoid. Shidrew finally works up the courage to face his negative status and crawls over to help her out. She asks what the hell he's doing, and he explains he's got bowstring syndrome. Then, out of nowhere, the bow itself speaks in his mind. Shidrew, put the string on the bow. The girl, a bit freaked out by this, backs off for a second, but then just hands him the weapon. Right away, Shidrew remembers all those videos he used to watch when he was an unemployed loser and strings the bow like it's nothing. Impressed, Seika hands him an arrow and tells him to shoot, and Shidrew does his best to avoid touching her. No point in losing 10% of his HP for no reason. Since he's now way over leveled, he decides to try out one of his archery skills and fires the arrow at the enemies, but the shot goes off into the woods. No one was ready for what happened next. Out of nowhere, a massive magic circle forms in the clouds, and suddenly, a dragon emerges, annihilating the goblins. To explain away this ridiculous feat, Shidrew lies to Seika, saying he used to be in the archery club, and hands her the bow back. With more goblins closing in, the archer now had the chance to cover her teammates on the front lines from a distance. She let loose, firing away at the enemies like she had a machine gun in her hands. Somehow, though, she managed to miss every single shot. Watching the scene unfold, Shidrew picked a different skill and turned a stick into more arrows, giving Seika another opportunity to waste every last one just as enthusiastically as before. Luckily, their two friends up front handled things just fine, clearing a path straight to Irie City. After the journey, everyone arrived at their new destination starving, and the first thing the blonde girl spotted was a local burger joint. Drawn in by the smell of fries, the group dashed inside, everyone except Shidrew. Even though he enjoyed their company, it was time for him to say goodbye. Strolling through the city, Shidrew caught his reflection in a fountain and wondered what he could find to satisfy his hunger. Just then, a cat approached. He reached out to pet it but hesitated, remembering that if it turned out to be female, he'd instantly lose 10% of his HP just like every other time he touched a girl. That rule still applied. Seika showed up right after, startling the big guy so badly he fell into the fountain and ended up soaked. Despite her chaotic entrance, her intentions were pure. She'd brought Shidrew a huge burger to thank him for fixing the string on her bow. Distracted by the smell of teriyaki sauce, he reached out for the sandwich and accidentally brushed her finger, triggering the penalty he'd been so worried about. The result? 58 trillion points of damage, enough to wipe out the population of 300 Earths. The colossal damage sent his meal flying against the wall, leaving Seika devastated as her thoughtful gift became modern art. Embarrassed, Shidrew tried to make things right, relying on those sales skills from his previous life. He apologized, explaining that his hand had been shaking because Seika was just too pretty. When he went to pick up the burger from the ground, Seika offered him the one she'd brought in her bag. Apologizing herself for being too pretty, Shidrew noticed it was her own food, but she reminded him she was rich, unlike him, who didn't even have a penny to his name. Besides, he'd helped her not just with the bowstring, but also by making more arrows for her. Touched by her kindness, Shidrew accepted the sandwich with a smile, thinking he might be able to return the favor one day. Just then, the rest of their friends arrived and called them back to continue the journey. So Shidrew realized his solo adventure would have to wait. On the way, they stopped to buy supplies. Seika, never missing a chance to show off her wealth, ordered a ridiculous amount of arrows even though her bag was already overflowing. And Shidrew could magically craft arrows by the dozen if he wanted to. After they finished shopping, the girl turned to the big guy and asked if he wasn't going to buy anything. But then she remembered of course he couldn't, since he was flat broke. The other two in the group arrived soon after, having found a nice inn where they could spend the night. Seika was practically bouncing with excitement to get there, but Shidrew just wanted to hang out in the park and turned down the invitation. So, the girl offered to pay for his room. He refused, insisting he couldn't accept, but Seika wouldn't let it go. She teased him, saying he was only refusing because the offer came from her. Flustered, he denied it, but Seika just took that as a yes, grabbed him by the shirt, and dragged him along. Realizing he barely felt her grip through his clothes, Shidrew started thinking maybe he could use that to his advantage, even if, right now, he was kind of mesmerized by how forceful she could be. Later at the inn, while Seiji was busy counting up how much money the group had left, Seika and the little blonde were taking a bath. Shidrew, lying on his bed, thought about how he couldn't afford to rack up any more debt. Sadly, He didn't have any money in this world, his earnings were slashed to a tenth of what they should be. If he didn't figure out a decent way to make some cash soon, he'd end up stuck somewhere, which would be a disaster, maybe even bad enough to make him want to go back to the world he'd tried so hard to escape. Long story short, he needed to act, and fast. The next day, Shaidru handed out all sorts of food to his teammates. Everyone was thrilled, so he joked that he'd gotten it from some kind soul after pretending to be a tired worker catching the last train home. Seika didn't get the joke, which made Shaidru realize just how innocent she really was. To top it off, she scolded him for begging, saying that even though he was poor, that wasn't the answer. If he ever needed anything, he should just ask her. After all, everyone knew she was loaded. In reality, Shaidru had technically bought all the food. He'd figured out that the rules of the game here were a lot simpler than he thought. What he'd been doing was bartering. Using his sales skills, he cranked out a pile of arrows and sold them to the weapons shop, taking 40% of the price in goods. Once everyone was full, Seika pulled out the map to pick their next adventure. She admitted she'd love to explore more of the city first, but the leader reminded them that their income came first. Monsters didn't exactly pay out cash. His plan was to take the group to Arga Cave, not far from Irie, the town they were in. Seika was all for it, excited for another quest. But the blonde girl looked a little uneasy about the danger. Hearing they were headed for Arga Cave, a man walked up and offered to be their guide. He introduced himself as another Reincarnated, just like the rest of them. The guy did a double take when he saw Shaidru, who just shrugged. Yeah, that's really his face. Anyway, the man pulled out 4 items he claimed could be found in the very first house you land in when you enter this world, and that they gave a one-time discount at the inn. Seika was amazed and wished she'd found any of those in her own starter house, and the guide said they could use the discount at reception. Seiji was immediately suspicious about this sudden generosity, but Seika didn't care and just took the item, grinning. The leader asked who the guy was, and he introduced himself as Kayoshiro, a humble worker who made a living showing newbies around. Shaidru was instantly on edge. The guy looked exactly like the type who preyed on beginners. Still, with the power of the absolute god on his side, he decided to let Seiji handle it. Even with the group running low on funds, Seiji figured hiring a guide was a solid investment for this quest. He offered Kayoshiro 120 rira a day, plus a bonus from whatever they found in the cave. With everything settled, the team set off for Arga Cave. On the way, they ran into a horde of goblins, giving Seika yet another opportunity to showcase her incredible talent for missing every single shot. Feeling sorry for her, Kayoshiro suggested she learn to save her arrows. Seika just laughed, being rich. She had no idea what that meant, so Kayoshiro tried a new approach, putting it in terms she'd understand. Seika, imagine each arrow costs 100 million yen. That finally clicked for her. With that thought, she began to take aim more carefully, and, at last, managed to hit a goblin. It was her first time. Riding high, she boasted that it was a piece of cake and declared that now, with her archery club experience, she'd even surpassed Mr. Shaidru. The rest of the group moved on to deal with the remaining goblins, leaving Shaidru behind, still wary of the guide. Even if the guy had just helped Seika out, his instincts as a salesman always made him suspicious of any business deal. As he pondered, he realized it was Kayoshiro who'd recommended those helmet lanterns they were all wearing, and they were clearly made by another Reincarnator. Since nothing like them existed in this world, they could have bought torches, but of course, Seika insisted on spending 60 rira each on the helmets. Later on, during a break, Seiji and the blonde girl sparred to train. The guide advised Seiji to guard his wrists and use the weight of his weapon when striking. As for the girl, she needed to remember that her dagger's strength lay in its speed and lightness. Off on her own, Seika kept missing every single shot. Kayoshiro asked if Shaidru was going to join in, but the big guy said he didn't have the right skills for it. The guide admitted that leveling up with the staff was tough, but the weapon's final ability was amazing if you had the patience to stick with it. Shaidru already knew that. Before dawn, he'd left town to make some arrows and ended up running into a giant orc. That's when he decided to try out his staff's strongest move. The name of the power was Final Destiny +2, a skill so destructive it promised to wipe out everything within a 200-mile radius, potentially killing about 1.5 million people. If Shaidru ever used that thing in Saitama Prefecture, he'd basically connect the Pacific Ocean to the Sea of Japan, so of course, he cancelled it on the spot. Anyway, Kayoshiro advises the young man to get into some fights and gain real experience, or else he'll have to retire, just like Kayoshiro did. Back in the day, Kaisho used to be part of a mercenary group where he and the leader were pretty much equals, but he ended up retiring because he just didn't have the right skills. The boss, on the other hand, climbed all the way to the top and eventually became king. Kaioshiro is convinced that Shidru would be shocked to find out that Guy was level 80, with an average of 160 points in every stat. In reality, Shidru thinks the guy's pretty weak, but his stunned expression makes the guide believe he's impressed. Eventually, the team makes it to the Arga cave, which looked just like some ancient ruin. Seika was trembling with fear at the idea of going in, so the blonde offered her hand to calm her down, which made Shidru wonder just how old this girl was. She acted like a kid, lighting up when she saw the limestone stalactites hanging from the ceiling. Kaioshiro, meanwhile, warned her to be careful that none of them came crashing down on her head, sensing his companion's immaturity. Seiji pulled a little trick to figure out Seika's age. He claimed it'd be good to know for the team's strategy, then asked her how old she really was back in the real world, revealing that he himself was in his 30s. At that, Seika admitted she wasn't actually 16 like her body in this world, she was older, 17. Shidru could hardly believe it, but Seiji pretended not to mind and asked if she was studying for college entrance exams. Seika said yes, and she'd only ever gotten straight A's. Led by Kaioshiro, the group moved on, battling giant bats as they made their way to the deepest part of the cave, where a massive door awaited them. As always, Seika dashed ahead, trying to open it without a second thought. So the guide asked her what level she was. When she answered 3, he told her she'd be killed the second she stepped inside that room. There wasn't some amusement park behind that door, but the boss of this whole mess. Horrified, Seika ducked behind her friend, and Seiji decided it was best to call it a day. Before heading back, the leader thanked the guide for his help, but Kaioshiro had other plans to wrap up their outing. To celebrate their contract, he said he'd prepared a little party for his comrades. So, he led the group to a door with a sign that read, "Meeting Room," 3 words that nearly drove Shidru mad, thanks to all his corporate life in the past. Seiji asked if the guide built this room, but Kaioshiro said no. It was actually another reincarnated person who created this safe place, where neither monsters nor magic could break in. Once inside, Seika was blown away by the table packed with treats, and Kaioshiro encouraged everyone to enjoy this welcome party for the newly reincarnated. Shidru quietly used his detection skill to check for any drugs hidden in the cans, but figured that, even if there was, nothing like that would actually work on him. Seiji thanked Kaioshiro for the party, but said he needed to get back to town before sunset. Kaioshiro didn't push it. He just said he understood he only wanted to do something nice for everyone. Feeling guilty for brushing off the guy's kindness so quickly, Seiji changed his mind and promised to make the most of the moment. And so, the 4 of them sat down for drinks, while the leader couldn't stop crying over the fact that he'd suspected someone as nice as Kaioshiro. Seika chugged her whole can and immediately asked for another, making Shidru worry about his companions. He could use an antidote spell, but since that would glow, everyone would catch on right away. Wondering if conversation might counteract the effects, he asked the group what they used to do in their past lives. But that question obviously soured the mood, since everyone here had come to this world as a loser. Even so, Seiji broke the ice, puffed out his chest, and started sharing his story. When he was still in school, he got tired of everything and ran away from home to start his own company, Success Life. Shidru remembered having done business there, and the boss looked just like Seiji. Seiji recalled that one day, a salesman showed up at his company out of the blue, trying to sell him a ridiculously expensive copier. Naturally, he tried to bring the price down, but the salesman told him something he'd never forget. "I'm going to make you smile. I'll never let you down." He also advised the boss to work less and enjoy life more. That's what Seiji carried with him ever since, stressing less and doing more of what he loved. Still, he ended up going bankrupt after a failed investment in artificial intelligence. Because of that, he feels like he let that salesman down, betrayed his expectations. So, Seiji swore that in this world, he'd never make the same mistake again. Remembering all that, he mentioned that the salesman's name was Shidru and asked the big guy for his last name. Shidru's real family name was Yoshioka, but he lied and said it was Sasaki. Suddenly, the sleeping drug kicked in, and all 4 of them passed out. Kaioshiro returned to chain them up with his goons, only for us to find out that Shidru had just been pretending to be unconscious, and the feeling of being handcuffed brought back memories he'd rather forget. Either way, it wasn't him who made the first move. It was Seiji, who managed to stay half aware even after the drug. Obviously, the kid took a beating, given his condition, while his companion was just biding his time. waiting for the right moment to act. When Seiji realized Kyoshiro was a rookie kidnapper, he lamented that so many people who arrived in this world were already broken-hearted from their old lives, and just as they were about to get a second chance, men like Kyoshiro came along and snatched it away. Kyoshiro just agreed this was a world for losers, and it was easy to fool people desperate for a shot at redemption. Tired of all the chatter, the boss finally orders his goons to finish the job. That's when Shidru jumps into action. Pulling out his improvised skill, Pig's Leap. Using his weight, he launches himself forward and knocks the thugs back. Meanwhile, Seiji, who thinks Shidru is incredibly weak, suddenly finds himself at a massive disadvantage, so he vows to end his enemies in a single blow. The thugs ignore him and keep chasing their targets, forcing Shidru to step in again, this time with spinning attacks that make full use of his size and shape. According to the big guy, if these punks want to hurt him, they'll need to send in a woman. But the fight gets so close that it looks like Shidru's about to get beaten down. That's when Seiji reveals a brilliant light shining from his right fist. He says he once swore never to betray his friend's trust, and that he'd pay the price if he ever broke that promise. In exchange, Seiji was granted this extraordinary power, which bursts into a red glow whenever his anger hits its limit. Right then, Kyoshiro tries to strike Seiji with his sword, but Shidru blocks the attack with his handcuffs and tells his friend to use him as a shield while he gets his skill ready. In real life, Shidru always hated how good people were the ones who got the short end of the stick. So now, his biggest wish is to build a new world where kindness actually gets rewarded. With that resolve, Shidru Yoshioka decides he's not going to run away, and asks the boss to show him how it's done. With that, Seiji gains the confidence he needs and unleashes the red light from his fist. The surge of power transforms his muscles dramatically, even giving him wings, turning the boy into Aldean, the unbreakable hero, a nickname Shidru isn't fond of at all. Shidru tries to make sense of what's happening, while Aldean conjures the holy thunder at lightning speed, a move known as Aurora Shining Destination. But just as the hero's punch is about to connect with the main villain's face, he pulls back. After all, it's not up to him to pass judgment on these criminals. That's a job for the law. Sure, punishing these guys himself would be simple, but that would rob them of the chance to truly pay for what they've done. If the law handles them, maybe just maybe they'll have to face their sins and be reborn. Shidru thinks his partner is being way too soft, but Kyoshiro surrenders and drops his weapon. With that, Aldean turns his back on the man and warns that there'll be no mercy if they commit another crime. Shidru knows it's a terrible idea to take his eyes off the crook. And sure enough, Kyoshiro uses the distraction to attack the hero. That's when the big guy jumps in, throwing his full weight around to block the enemy and send him crashing to the ground. The other thugs immediately start kicking the poor guy while he's down, but it looks like that massive frame is enough to soak up every blow. In response, Shidru digs a booger from his nose and flings it at the ceiling like a missile, causing an explosive mess. He credits the attack to Aldean, saying it was all his doing and that he can do even more if he wants. No one really buys the ugly guy's story, but he swears he saw a white eagle descend from the sky as if answering the hero's fury to save those in need. Aldean asks if that actually happened, and Shidru, with a straight face, says it did. Either way, after that display of strength, the gang finally surrenders for good. Kyoshiro, speaking for the whole crew, begs for forgiveness for their crimes and promises never to do wrong again. Obviously, Shidru thinks this sudden change of heart is way too convenient, so he orders all the criminals to line up. Then, he tells Aldean to hit them with his special move. The thugs start sweating bullets at the thought, but the winged hero, of course, isn't on board with that. So, the big guy asks if at least they could be punished with a slap from flaming fists, because they clearly don't understand other people's pain and need to learn through the whip of love. Understanding his friend's point, Aldean vows that his fist will pierce the pit of evil. That said, he simply returns to his original form, explaining that there's no reason to be angry anymore, and the whip of love shouldn't come from rage otherwise, it's just self-indulgence. In this Good Samaritan's view, love means carving the pain of your hand and the one you'd strike into your heart. Like everyone else, Shidru has no idea what any of that's supposed to mean, but whatever. Seiji then orders everyone to stand tall, make of that what you will, because now it's time to teach each of them a lesson. As they follow his command, the hero smacks each thug across the face with all his might, while they thank him for the punishment. Watching the absurd scene unfold, Shidru can't help but wonder how on earth he ended up here. After the punishment, the adventurer duo ties up the criminals and helps their friends, but then Seijo passes out. Kaiosho celebrates that the sedative finally kicked in. Convinced this is his chance to win. To seal his victory, he invites Shidru, whom he calls Pig, to join their gang, pointing out how tough it must be for him hanging around a group of pretty boys where he never stands a chance. On the other hand, if he teams up with these middle-aged losers, maybe the big guy will land a woman every now and then, not to mention some good cash. In response, Shidru breaks his chains and insists Seiji is stronger than he is. The thugs can't understand how someone so ridiculously ugly could be so righteous, and even though Shidru usually doesn't care about this kind of insult, he's starting to lose his patience. Hours later, he turns the gang in to the authorities and gets a reward of 100,000 riras, the equivalent of 10 million yen in Japan or 350,000 ris. With everyone back on their feet, Seiji suggests they all enjoy the money, but Seika reminds him that she and her friend were asleep the whole time and didn't help at all. Still, their leader takes responsibility for putting them in danger by being careless and trusting Kaiosho. Even so, the girls point out that it was the boy who single-handedly took out all the henchmen. Seika asks if Shidru was asleep too, and he's left speechless. Then, Seiji assures everyone that the big guy was the bravest of them all, using his enormous, round body to protect him. Hearing this, Seika celebrates and declares the big guy the MVP, the best player of the match. Seiji couldn't agree more, so he tells his friend to take the money. But as it turns out, Shidru's reward gets slashed by a factor of 10,000, so he'll barely see a penny of it. Because of that, he's already thinking about saying goodbye to the group once he pays off his debt to Seika. He explains to the crew that he spends money way too fast and needs someone wise to hold onto it for him. Seika volunteers to be his savings account. After all, as she always says, she's rich and probably thinks that means she's a financial genius. Seiji jokes that she blows all her money on useless stuff, dragging her through the mud metaphorically. Even though her confidence has taken a hit, Shidru still thinks leaving his share with her is a good call, and so that's exactly what he does. He uses Seika as his personal bank. Without wasting time, he and his bank hit up a burger joint for a good meal, and the girl seems delighted to show off her money-handling skills. "I'll pay," she says at the counter, as if she weren't using his cash. Alone for a moment, Shidru figures that 25,000 riras should be enough for a night at an inn and a few meals. After that, he'll just have to get by on his wits, penniless as ever. Speaking of which, the time to say goodbye to the group is almost here, which means this meal feels like a last supper. Sometime later, Seika shows up with a burger big enough to satisfy anyone's hunger. She asks for the magic word, so he just goes, "Thanks." That doesn't do it for her, so Shidru tries again with a proper "thank you," finally making her smile. Right then, Shidru realizes she actually loves these goofy little interactions, which tells him she's nothing like the grumpy girl he first thought she was. To keep the conversation going, he asks if she likes burgers. She answers, "I fell in love with them the day before yesterday." That throws him for a loop. He wonders how much of a shut-in she must be to only try a burger now, already well past her rookie days. But it kind of makes sense. She bites into the front of the sandwich and lets most of the filling spill out the back. Seika asks what his stats are, but he tries to dodge the question, saying they're nothing special. She's disappointed, because apparently, he missed out on a trick the game gives you before tossing you into this world. According to her, if you lower your appearance stat, you get more bonus points. Shidru is stunned that Saka knows about this, but he points out she doesn't look like she used that trick. Actually, Seika reveals she dropped her appearance all the way down to -16. He doesn't get it, she's definitely not ugly. Flustered by his reaction, she asks if he thinks she's pretty. He, a little embarrassed, says yes. Seika admits she made a wish on the game's start screen. Down at the bottom, there was a special details section, and she wrote in that she wanted to be pretty. Shidru's jaw just about drops. He could have done that too. And now he's stuck looking like that model from a commercial he can't even remember the name of. Right then, a little cat wanders into the diner and catches their attention. Noticing how excited she is since she's never seen one up close, Shidru tells her to go ahead and pet it. Out of nowhere, Seika remembers she can stand now, so she rushes after the cat, only to trip along the way. She doesn't fall, but it's enough to scare the cat right out the door. Shidru, thinking she was about to faceplant, throws himself after her like an idiot completely unnecessarily. Seika, totally unfazed, asks why he's on the floor. He says he just likes to get a bit of exercise after eating. In the end, she does try to pet the kitty, but it's way more skittish than she expected and barely lets her touch it. Meanwhile, Shidru, mortified, rushes off to the bathroom for a little reflection on the toilet. We've all done it at least once. Sitting there, nearly in tears, he remembers how earlier Seika showed him her hands and then looked at and touched them herself. Usually, when someone wants to feel pretty, they touch their face, not their hands, but maybe it's not just her hands, maybe Seika has some kind of disability affecting her legs, which is why she can't walk on her own. Poor girl, Shidru thinks. God doesn't exist. Or wait, he does. He's God, the absolute God, Shidru himself. At that moment, Seika knocks on the men's room door, asking if whatever he ate isn't sitting well. He says he'll be out in a second, and thinks to himself that this girl has zero sense of social cues. With all that innocence, she'd be an easy target for creeps like Kyoshiro. Still, there's something only the absolute God can do in a situation like this. After washing his hands and face, Shidru comes out. When Seika calls him to go meet up with the rest of the team, he decides then and there he's going to make sure Seika becomes the best person she can possibly be. Later that day, in a tavern, Seiji brings up the future. He wants to know what everyone thinks about picking a class now, since planning out your stats based on your class will help in combat, making everyone's abilities more dynamic. Seiji himself wants to be a hero. He suggests the blonde girl should be a mage, and she's all for it, while Shidru is recommended for epic fighter. The big guy isn't thrilled with how that sounds, and Seika chimes in that she wants to be a hero too. Like the group's leader, everyone figured she'd want to be an epic fighter. But as always, she's full of surprises and suddenly changes her mind. Anyway, after all that discussion, everyone picks their class, and here's how the party shapes up. The blonde is the hunter, Seiji is the hero, Seika chose mage, and Shidru, of course, is the epic fighter. When Shidru sees the fancy gear their leader's rocking, he thinks Seiji may be careful about most things, but he sure splurged on this one. Seika tugs at Shidru's sleeve like a little kid, announcing that she's now a great mage. After all her talk about wanting to be a fighter, Shidru has to admit, this class actually suits her perfectly. Anyway, Seiji unfurls the map and says the group's next stop is the biggest city in the region, the Principality of Valeria. But before that, he warns everyone that they can only bring snacks worth up to 3 riras each. With that out of the way, the adventure starts tomorrow morning. After they're dismissed, Seika musters up all her courage and asks her friend to jump rope at the park. That little request jogs a memory for Shidru. A while back, he and Sokka were in a weapon shop. She complained there were hardly any weapons for mages. She even got interested in a weapon for epic fighters, but dropped it when she found out which class it belonged to. Then she liked the look of a nunchaku for epic kung fu fighters. Shidru and the shopkeeper figured she meant the nunchaku, but she was eyeing the rope next to it. According to the clerk, that rope is the most basic yet supreme weapon of kung fu fighters, which makes him think maybe she's some kind of seasoned warrior. After leaving the shop with her new gear, Shidru teaches her how to use it. Seika's honestly surprised that even slowpokes like him can jump rope. Just a few hours later, she's starting to get the hang of it, but she's a little sad. She wishes she could be jumping rope with her blonde friend, who, by the way, has never told anyone her name, not even once, which makes Seika wonder if the girl just doesn't want to get close to people. About that, Shidru comes up with a good idea for how she could get to know the other girl better. Back in the present, the giant hides in a bush while Seika teaches the blonde how to jump rope. At some point, though, Seika brings up the subject of the girl's name, and just like that, the blonde stops jumping, as if it's a touchy subject. So, Seika shares that she and Shidru had come up with a nickname for her. Thinking of words that felt soft, like breeze, she landed on Reese. Overwhelmed, the blonde leaps high across the square, showing off some serious athletic skills, and Shidru remembers that, come to think of it, this girl didn't even get hurt in their first fight. Seeing what she can do, all the adventurers in the square crowd around her, offering her well-paid positions in their parties. Seika suddenly feels left out and rejected, to the point that she starts crying. Shidru steps out of hiding to comfort his friend. The odd adventurers begin judging the girl and getting annoyed at her, but the blonde stands up for her teammate, saying she only jumped like that to make Seika happy. Shidru jokes that it would have been a good idea to say that, instead of pretending to be a kangaroo, and the blonde runs off, embarrassed, after apologizing for the commotion. That night, at the inn, Seika uses Shidru's cape as a handkerchief to blow her nose. Out of nowhere, she finds a letter slipped under her door. It's a note from Reese, apologizing again and saying how much she loved the nickname, asking Seika if they can be friends. Excited, Seika dashes out to find her new friend. Once he's alone, Shidru calls out to Rize, who's been hiding in another hallway. She invites the young giant to talk in one of the rooms. Kneeling in midair, she shows off more of her athletic prowess as she apologizes to him. But before she gets to the reason for her apology, she reveals she knows Shidru's last name isn't Sasaki, it's Yoshioka. In other words, he's Mr. Y, the one who saved the saint in that story the leader told back in the dungeon. Check out these videos appearing on your screen and subscribe so you don't miss the next part.